Welcome back to our session on Eden Restored. We are looking at nutrition, Dr. Nutrition. What is the best nutrition for us today in the 21st century as opposed to way back in the Garden of Eden? But I thought maybe as a springboard, we'd take a look at what the diet was that we read in the book of Genesis. If you go back to Genesis chapter 1, you'll see there that we're told that herb-bearing seed and tree fruit yielding seed would be the two main sources for food for man in their unfallen state. Now I understand what tree fruit yielding seed is all about. Mangoes, I love mangoes, and peaches, Georgia peaches. Well, what exactly is herb-bearing seed? Well, in my mind, I think maybe they're melons, cantaloupes for one. I really enjoy cantaloupes, but I don't know. I wasn't there. But then neither of any of you have been there either, so you'll allow me to guess. Whatever it was a healthy diet. And it was all that man needed to be strong, to be able to run, to lift, to think. Everything that man could do was found in those nutrients, in those fruits and melons, or whatever they were. Now after man fell, in Genesis chapter 3, verse 18, we see something was supplemented to man's diet, and it was referred to as the herb of the field. Now, again, I don't know, but I seem to think that this was probably vegetables. I love all the different kinds of vegetables there are. And it wasn't until the flood, when man's sin had gotten so bad that God decided it was time to cleanse the world with a flood. After that flood, after Noah and his family came out of the ark, at that time, we read in Genesis chapter 9, verse 3 to 4, that God gave man meat to eat, but specifically meat without blood. God said that the blood in the meat was going to shorten their lives. Here we read it in Genesis chapter 9, flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall you not eat. And surely your blood of your lives will I require, at the hand of every beast will I require it. God is saying, I'm going to shorten your life for eating blood. I give you permission. It's not the best food, but because the world has been destroyed by this flood and there's not the abundance of fruits and vegetables that there was before, I give you permission to eat flesh. But with the one restriction that you're not to eat the blood that is in the flesh. Now here's a graph to show exactly what did happen when man started to eat flesh. You can see that we have Adam, starts off at a little over 900 years. Then we have Methuselah, the longest living person. He lived to 969. And I've sped it up a little bit till the time of Noah, who is also a vegetarian. All these patriarchs in the Bible, in the Old Testament, were vegetarians. Shortly after the flood, when they all came out, they started eating meat. And you can see that Noah's oldest son, Shem, dropped to 600 years. That he lost 1/3 of his lifespan by what? Not eating enough fruits and vegetables? No. He shortened his lifespan by eating protein in the form of flesh. And you can see that the general trend is then down, 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 until you finally get down to David's time, when he said that man's allotted time was 70 years, or 70 years. Now, is this actually happening in our day? Well, we've visited Africa and been to different countries there, and I've had the opportunity to actually talk with Maasai, one of the tribes, and their cousins, the Kikuyu. And I met them especially last year in Kenya. The Maasai are very tall people, and according to them, this statistic here, they are about 6 to 7 feet high. They weigh about 23 pounds heavier than their cousin, the Kikuyu, but their lifespan is only 50 years. What is their principal diet? Meat, and they actually drink raw blood or cook with blood. So the very thing that God said man was not supposed to eat is the blood. Is regular part of their diet. Now the Kikuyu, while they do have some meat in their diet, they're basically looked on as vegetarians. What is their height? About 5.5 feet average. Their lifespan, 30 years longer than the Maasai. So here you have the Maasai, who are a very noble looking warrior. The men are very agile, they're quick, but they have a shorter lifespan. All because of what? The food they eat, the very same thing that God prohibited back after the flood. This tribe has not changed. They eat the blood and it consequently shortening their lives. Here's a promise in the book of Exodus. If thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord your God, and will do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep his statutes, including his health laws, I will put none of these diseases upon thee which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee. Well, what people ask me, and I've asked the same question, what kind of diseases did these Egyptians have? Well, lo and behold, they had the same diseases that we have here about 33,500 years later. They had stomach aches, they had headaches, they had common cold, dysentery, measles, pneumonia. They even had cancers and eye infections, arthritis, arteriosclerosis, dental cavities. They had dementia. So you can see that the health climate back then looks somewhat similar to what we have to deal with here in the 21st century. Now, in the Old Testament, God continued to reinforce this injunction against eating blood. In the book of Leviticus, where God sets out what is clean and unclean animals, and which are good and healthy to eat if you're going to eat meat, he also said in Leviticus 17, verse 14, I will even set my face against that soul that eateth blood, and will cut him off from among his people. Ye shall eat the blood of no manner of flesh, for the life of all flesh is in the blood thereof. So while the blood carries life in it, oxygen and food, these revitalizing forces in our nutrition, it also carries away from the cells all the waste material that is produced from the metabolism of this healthy food. So the good and the bad is in the blood. And since we can't take out the bad, God says, I don't want to eat any of it. In fact, these people, the Hebrews, started getting an appetite for their food back in Egypt, and they started lusting for flesh, and so God said, okay, I will give you quail to eat. And they went out there, all this quail come in, it was dropping on the ground right in front of them, and they were able to pick up these birds, prepare them for eating, and they immediately had a banquet of this flesh, and it said the flesh was right between their teeth. While they were chewing it, God's anger came down upon the people, and it said he smote the people, and there was a great plague. Thousands and thousands of people died with this flesh between their teeth. Not because God was prohibiting having this food to eat, but because they were lusting for going back to Egypt. That was their disobedience. He also gave an injunction against fat. Again in Leviticus chapter 3, verse 17, we read, It shall be a perpetual statute for your generations throughout all your dwellings that you eat neither fat nor blood. God knows that not only is the blood not good for us, all this fat in our diet, animal fat that is, will cause disease just like it did amongst the ancient Egyptians, just like it does today in North America or anywhere else in the world. If you have a high-fat diet, your body is going to pay the price for it, and you will have a shorter life. Well, people will come to me and say, well, I'm a Christian, I'm a born-again Christian, I'm a New Testament Christian, and those health laws really, they were for the Old Testament Jews. And I said, well, that's interesting thinking, but really it says in the New Testament that those health laws, some of them at least, are enjoined by God on his people today, even Christians. In the book of Acts chapter 15, verse 20, we read, they, that is these new Gentile converts that were converting to Christianity from their paganism, who ate all kinds of foods. They ate the clean, they ate the unclean, they drank, they smoked, they took drugs, all these things like people do today. But the Christian church said, no, there needs to be a distinction. And one of the distinctions was going to be their food. Of course, they were not to offer things to idols. That was one of the 10 Commandments. They were not to commit moral immorality acts, fornication. That was also one of the 10 Commandments. But notice, the Christian church also said that they were to keep themselves from things strangled and from blood. If you're going to eat meat, you do not strangle the animal like they do in some places. You have to cut the throat, drain out all the blood, throw it away, and then the meat is fit for human consumption. So there again, in the Christian church, you may be a born-again Christian, a New Testament Christian that's listening to this program. This also applies to you. If you are truly a follower of Christ, you want to follow the New Testament as well as the Old Testament because they're both the same. They're inspired by the same Holy Spirit who wants us to prosper and to be in health even as our soul prospereth. You are a living temple. You are not a toilet. You are not a compost bucket. God wants you to put good things in your temple, healthy things that will make you productive and live a long, productive life. What? Know you not that your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost, which is in you, which you have of God, and you are not your own? For you are bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. Now, the first time I ever heard this verse was when I was hitchhiking across Florida. Now, this is over 40 years ago. And I ended up in the Everglades in southern Florida, out in the middle of no place. The highway was as straight as an arrow. You could look off into the horizon going one way, and you could turn around and look the other direction, straight as an arrow. And I got stranded out there one night, and I camped out in my sleeping bag, and in the morning, I got up. And a car would go by maybe once an hour. There was hardly any traffic, and I thought, I think I'm going to be here for a while. Well, up to this point, I had never really prayed. I'd been reading my Bible every day, but I'd never really prayed. And I thought it was kind of a neat idea, but I never really prayed. Well, this day was a day for me to try prayer. I'm standing there in this place, nothing coming by, and I look down the highway and I say, oh, I see a car coming. So I just bow my head and I say, oh God, please, could you make this car stop for me? And I looked down the highway and I recognized the grill on the front of the car and I said, Lord, a green Cadillac. No, I guess I first said, Lord, a Cadillac. And as it got closer, I could see it was green. And I said, Lord, a green Cadillac. And you know what happened? This green Cadillac pulled up right in front of me and stopped. And the electric window came down and I'm standing there kind of dumbstruck, like, I can't believe my prayer has just been answered. And this voice says, well, do you want to get in or not? And I said, oh, I came to my senses and I threw my backpack in the back seat of this green Cadillac and I climbed into the front seat and off we headed. Do you know who's sitting next to me? Sitting next to me in the driver's seat was Jack Frost. Now, in my mind, from where I come from, Jack Frost is a little nimble guy who's quick and he's associated with snow and crystals and he's always nimble and quick and jumping around. Well, the Jack Frost sitting next to me weighed probably close to 500 pounds. He took up more than his half of the front seat. He was a huge guy. And as we were driving along, again, I was not a Christian at the time. I was just reading the Bible, looking into this more and more. And Jack decided that he needed to preach to me because Jack was a brand new baby Christian. And he wanted to introduce me to the fact that I needed to take better care of this temple that I lived in. And, you know, he must have smelled the air and decided that I must have been a devotee to tobacco at the time. And so he said, you know, John, you need to take better care of this temple of yours. He said, you know, I'm just a new Christian and you might not be able to tell the difference, but my health is getting better. He said, you know, one day my pastor, he took me aside in the church. He took me into our sanctuary and it's beautiful in there. You know, it's got beautiful velvet carpets and the pews are velvet carpet and the stained glass windows. It's just beautiful in there. And he took me in there and he said, Jack, he says, what do you think of our sanctuary? And Jack said, oh, Pastor, this is beautiful in here. I just love to come in here and listen to the music and the word preached. And it just feels a little bit closer to heaven when I'm in here. And the pastor looked at Jack and he said, Jack, he said, what would you think if you came in here and all the air had the stench of tobacco? He said, the tobacco stains on the rugs. You could smell it in the pew. There was tar on the stained glass windows. What would you think? And Jack said, well, Pastor, I wouldn't like that at all. Well, it happened to be that Jack was a smoker at that time. Well, then the pastor said, well, Jack, what if you came into the sanctuary, our lovely sanctuary in here, and you looked up onto the beautiful vaulted ceilings and you saw great gobs of fat hanging off the ceiling. Great gobs of fat running down the walls and over the stained glass windows. Great gobs of fat falling onto our beautiful carpet and onto the pews. Everywhere you look, Jack, it was fat. Jack said, I got the message, Pastor. And he said, you know, you can look at Jack Frost and he doesn't look like he's losing any weight. But you know what? Jack Frost has lost 50 pounds. The whole world can eat ice cream, but Jack Frost does not eat ice cream. And this man, this born-again Christian, this Pentecostal Christian, was the one who first introduced me to this idea that we have a body temple. No matter how big it is, how tall it is, how short it is, we need to take care of it. And as we take care of it, God will do the rest and give us good health. And at 60 years old, 66 years old, in fact, I have very good health. And I'm very thankful that as I look back to the time when I was not taking care of this body temple, and I think of the health that I have now, compared to my father who had his first heart disease when he was 50, had multiple heart attacks and died prematurely. And I think if I had been living like him, drinking alcohol, smoking tobacco, coffee and tea, drugs, and then the other things that people do to their bodies like piercing their body, tattoos, immodest dress, unclean food, where would my health be today? When I can actually work alongside, we have a young fellow that's a bodybuilder. He could barely keep up with me as we were out in the fields raking hay one day. So I am grateful for this message of health, and I'm grateful to the God of heaven who has given me good health. Clean and unclean. In the book of Leviticus chapter 11, if you want to learn what the distinction between clean and unclean, go to that chapter and you'll see whether it's talking about animals, fish, birds, or insects. God has clearly laid out for us what He sees. If you're going to eat flesh, these are the ones you want to eat, and these are the ones you do not want to eat. So Leviticus chapter 11, it will tell you all that information. But whether you're going to eat meat or not, you still want to eat fruits, vegetables, nuts, and whole grains. There's a wide variety, all kinds of colors, all kinds of flavors, and having the opportunity to travel to different countries in the world, we have had the privilege of tasting some of the most delightful, delicious fruit and vegetables cooked in hundreds of different ways that truly can satisfy any palate, any taste bud. It's amazing the flavors out there for us. Now, in a book called Counsels on Diet and Foods by Ellen White, it's a compilation of health principles. There's this interesting thought that says it is impossible for those who make free use of flesh meats to have an unclouded brain and an active intellect. Well, that's very interesting. That was written in the late 1800s. But if you know anything about scientists, you'll recognize the name Albert Einstein as somebody who had an unclouded brain and a very active intellect. What did Albert Einstein have to say about nutrition? He said nothing will benefit human health and increase the chances for survival of life on Earth as much as the evolution to a vegetarian diet. Now here's a scientist, a premium scientist in nuclear physics, who says if you want to have a good brain, the more vegetables, fruits, nuts, and grains that you eat, the better your thinking will be. Now, I looked at this graph on one of our previous sessions talking about stimulation and depression. When we take a stimulant, let's take, for example, a caffeine as a stimulant. It stimulates our adrenals, which pump out adrenaline, and we have this rush, and we're ready to do some great, wonderful things. But after that effect wears off, our adrenal glands take a rest, and our adrenaline goes down, and we feel this slight depression. Well, at that point, we have to do a pick-me-up, so we'll get another cup of coffee. We have the all-American coffee break, and it picks the person right back up, not as high as that first jolt of Java coffee, and it leaves us a little bit less than where we started off. and up and down, up and down, up and down we go until finally we're drinking coffee just to feel like we felt normal before we started drinking coffee. People are addicted to coffee and other stimulants, and then of course they're addicted to some antidepressants which help them to get back up again. So we see this, people are medicating themselves with chemistry, whether it's drugs, whether it's beverages, whether it's foods, sugary foods, concentrated foods, to help them always to be on a high, but in reality, they're sinking lower and lower and lower, just trying to feel normal as they continue on this curve. Unhealthy diet, coffee, tea, Coke, alcohol, condiments, spices, salt, meat, unless of course you eat a healthy meat that has no blood in it. Refined foods, sugars, and oils. Now, you remember we talked about Dr. Temperance. I'd just like to come back to him for a minute. In the Bible, especially in the book of Proverbs, there's 3 references to honey. You know, the promised land is referred to as a land of milk and honey, so it makes you think that honey is a good thing. And in Proverbs, it actually says that. Proverbs chapter 24, verse 15 says, "My son, eat thou honey, because it is good, and the honeycomb which is sweet in its taste." Well, okay, we eat honey. Well, can we eat all we want? No, Dr. Temperance comes in, Dr. Self-Control says, sure, honey is good, but you need to take it temperately. And we read in that same chapter, or the next chapter, Proverbs 25, verse 16, it says, "Have you found honey? Eat so much as is sufficient for you, lest you be filled therewith and vomit it." So obviously you can eat honey, but if you eat too much, it's going to be bad for your body. Your body's going to revolt. And then the next verse, in verse 27 of the same chapter, it says, "It is not good to eat much honey." It sounds like somebody's, okay, honey's good for me? Oh, it tastes so good. I'm going to eat some more and more. And you hit this Dr. Temperance, and he says you need to slow down, but you don't slow down, you keep eating, and finally you get to the point where the doctor says, "No more honey for you." How much sweet is good and how much sweet is bad? Honey is good? Well, what about sugar or all these other sweeteners? How much is good and how much is bad? Well, I'd like to show you something interesting. Just how much does the average American eat in sugar? And we're going to go through a typical day for an average American, and I can say that this was a typical day for me at one time in my life. So I know that this is true, and it's not an exaggeration. And some of you who are watching this program will be nodding your head, yes, yes. A typical American breakfast consists of maybe some orange juice, surely a cup of coffee with 2 teaspoons of sugar, and some white toast with 2 tablespoons of jam that has a total of 6 teaspoons of sugar. So we're going to go through, and some of you people in the audience, you can add up how many teaspoons we're going to get by the end of the day. So here we have a breakfast, but it's high sugar, it's a concentrated food, it doesn't last, and before you know it, we have low blood sugar, and so we reach for a chewing gum. And 2 sticks of chewing gum is 1 teaspoon of sugar. Well, that doesn't last very long. We come to the All-American Coffee break, and we have 2 glazed donuts worth 14 teaspoons of sugar. Of course, this sugar is hidden inside of it, right? 1 cup of coffee, and this time we're going to be careful on our added sugar. We're only going to use 1 teaspoon. So there we have 15 teaspoons of sugar. Where are we going next? Well, how about lunch? You know, the coffee break is worn off. It's all concentrated sugar. I need something to eat, and here we're going to have the All-American lunch. How about a burger, some fries, a Coke, and some condiments? Well, 12-ounce Coke has 8 teaspoons of sugar in it, and the condiments maybe 1 teaspoon of sugar. So there we have 9 extra teaspoons of sugar. Well, that doesn't last very long either, because that's refined carbohydrates. Our blood sugar tanks out, and we need something to pick us up. We have 2 more sticks of chewing gum, but we won't add these in. Let's move on to our coffee break in the afternoon. 8-ounce Coke, 5 teaspoons, and a chocolate bar for 7 teaspoons of sugar. Finally, we get to supper. And we have some, if you're a meat eater, you have a meat dish with some vegetables, and then you have some salad, maybe some fruit. And you know how many teaspoons of sugar? 0. 0 teaspoons. We had a healthy meal. We congratulate ourselves, but we have to have some dessert, right? And so we'll have a dessert, and what more than maybe, how about a piece of chocolate cake? That looks awfully good to me, but you'll see that it has 15 teaspoons of sugar. Wow, 15 teaspoons of sugar added to everything else we had. How much do we get? How much did it all add up to? Well, hopefully you can see on this plate, it added up to 61 teaspoons of sugar. Wow, did I really eat that much sugar? I probably ate more. And really today, I might eat teaspoons of sugar, 2 teaspoons of sugar hidden in a breakfast cereal or something like that. We don't put sugar on our table. So if we're only eating 2 or 3 teaspoons of sugar a day, who's eating my share? And if they're eating my share, they're eating a lot more than 61 teaspoons of sugar a day. Now, today is a very special day. Got home, I had dessert, but today's my birthday. And so, of course, the whole family has to go out, and where is a good place to go to have a real special treat for my birthday? I would elect a dairy place. And I love Banana Split. So Banana Split is 25 more teaspoons of sugar. Really? How much does that add up to? 85 teaspoons of sugar that one day. That's a lot of sugar. And you can see that without even trying, it's not hard to eat a lot of sugar in your diet. Now, if 1 teaspoon of sugar, this 1 cube here, represents 33 feet of sugar cane. Now, if you were to eat 33 feet of sugar cane to get that 1 teaspoon of sugar, you wouldn't have to worry about dental cavities, would you? You'd wear your teeth off before you even got finished with your first teaspoon of sugar. So when we're thinking of sugar, it truly is a concentrated food. It incorporates 33 times 85 teaspoons of sugar would be a lot of sugar. Now, when you eat sugar, the white blood cells in your body, phagocytes, have a sweet tooth. They'd rather eat sugar than some nasty old germ. And here in this graphic, you can see that one white blood cell, phagocytic index, will consume 14 bacteria in half an hour. If you increase your sugar intake to 6 teaspoons a day, your phagocytic index drops to 10 bacteria in half an hour. And 18 teaspoons for a cake drops down to 2 bacteria. And a banana split, which is similar to an uncontrolled diabetic, 1 bacteria to 1 white blood cell. And this is a common feature with people who have diabetes. They have rampant infections that will not cure. Well, let's stop here for a break with sugar, and we'll move on to the last part of this segment of this program.